Most people think you're supposed to hit a $100,000 net worth in your 20s, but that's almost never the case. According to the Federal Reserve's median household data, the median net worth for households under 35 is about $39,000, while households aged 35 to 44 have around $135,000. That means most families don't cross six figures until their late 30s or early 40s. And keep in mind, these are household figures. A household could be a single person, a couple, or an entire family. So, for younger adults, individual net worth is usually far lower. In this video, we'll break down exactly when households cross that $100,000 milestone, why progress feels painfully slow in your 20s, and what changes in your 30s that can finally push growth forward. To understand it clearly though, you first need to know why so many wealth numbers floating around online don't actually tell the truth. When it comes to measuring wealth, the numbers you usually see in the headlines can be very misleading. That's because most of those reports highlight the average, also known as a mean. The mean takes the total wealth, adds it all up, and divides by the number of households. On the surface it sounds simple, but in practice it can give a completely distorted picture. One billionaire can lift the average, but not change the financial reality of most households. That's why economists place much more weight on the median. The median is the exact middle point. Half of the households have more, half the households have less. It's not thrown off by outliers, which makes it a far better way to understand what's typical. To put this into perspective, imagine 10 households. 9 of them have less than $100,000 each, but one household has $10 million. That means that group suddenly looks like everyone is wealthy, but in reality, nothing changed for the other 9. Their financial situation stays the same, yet the average suggests that they're living in a rich community. The median, however, cuts right through that distortion and lands on the middle figure. The middle value is much closer to how the majority are actually doing. The difference between mean and median matters because it changes how you interpret your own progress. If you hear that the average net worth for your age group is extremely high, you might feel you're behind, but in truth the number could be inflated by a handful of people who bear no resemblance to your situation. That's where the Federal Reserve's methodology becomes important. The Fed often uses the median because it shows the typical household, not a number skewed by the extremely wealthy. In their report, median net worth is emphasized for exactly that reason. It's designed to give a realistic benchmark for the vast majority of families. If you were to see this on a graph, the contrast would be obvious. The mean net worth line jumps sharply upward because of how much wealth concentrates among the richest, while the median line moves at a slower, steadier pace. And that's the median line that matters for you. So for a realistic picture, follow the median. The key takeaway here is that focusing on averages can create unnecessary pressure. Averages paint a picture that doesn't reflect most people's reality, while the median shows the slow incremental growth that almost every household experiences. Understanding this shift helps reframe what progress really looks like. When you see that families often don't cross certain milestones until much later than the average suggests, you realize you're not lagging behind. You're right in line with how wealth actually builds over time. This is why the idea of being a certain number by your 20s or even early 30s can be misleading. The truth looks very different once you shift your attention to the median figures, and that truth can feel both sobering and reassuring. Sobering because the numbers are lower than most people assume, but reassuring because they reflect where real families actually are. Next, we'll break down what those median numbers really look like at different stages of life. And to make sense of it, we need to start right where the journey begins. Your 20s, when most people expect to build wealth fast, but end up discovering just how hard it really is. Starting out in your 20s often means facing money challenges you didn't expect. Instead of building wealth quickly, many young adults are juggling debt, modest earnings, and high living costs that leave little room for savings. It's not unusual to begin this decade in the negative, thanks to student loans, credit cards, or car payments needed just to get to work. That reality makes wealth building during this stage feel slower and more frustrating than the advice you hear online. To put that into perspective, imagine earning $35,000 a year while carrying $50,000 in student loans. Even with full-time employment, your net worth can easily be negative. Add rent, food, health insurance, bills, and transportation, and you're often left with very little to set aside. It's not a lack of effort. It's simply the math of early adulthood. This mismatch between income and obligations forces tough choices. Do you put every extra dollar toward paying down debt, hoping future income will let savings catch up later? Or do you start investing right away, even if debt still looms large? Most people don't have the budget space to do both aggressively, which means progress feels slow no matter what path you take. At the same time, you're constantly reminded that you should be saving big. Financial advice stresses the importance of compounding early, which is true, but saving just $100 or $200 a month doesn't feel like you're getting anywhere. Social media can make this worse. Seeing peers flaunt vacations, new cars, or even down payments on homes creates pressure to measure yourself against standards that often aren't realistic. The reality is that many of these same peers may also be in debt, or living paycheck to paycheck. It's just not what they're showing you. Housing is another obstacle. Renting gives flexibility and independence, but it doesn't build equity. For most young adults, rent takes up a third, sometimes half of their monthly income. Unlike a mortgage, those payments don't convert into ownership. So, wealth accumulation stays on hold until later in life, when homeownership becomes more common. The data makes the situation clear. According to the Federal Reserve, the median net worth for households under 35 is only about $39,000. That number includes cars, savings, and whatever small assets people may have. But it also includes debt. It highlights how common it is for this age group to be far from six figures. If your net worth is low or even negative, you're not falling behind. You're right in line with the majority of your peers. The good news is that your 20s don't have to be about dramatic growth. Instead, this is a foundation-building decade. Prioritizing an emergency savings account, reducing high-interest debt like credit cards, and starting retirement contributions, even small amounts, sets up the structure for faster progress in the years ahead. Think of this stage less as a race to big numbers, and more as building solid financial habits that will compound later. It's normal in this decade to feel like wealth is moving at a crawl. The slow pace doesn't mean you're failing. It means you're at a stage where survival, stability, and small wins matter most. As long as you're gradually improving your financial position, you're setting the groundwork that will let future growth actually take off. And while the 20s often feel weighed down by debt and limited income, this stage is temporary. As time goes on, incomes usually climb, expenses become easier to manage, and opportunities for savings and investing increase. That's when the math starts to shift and wealth building begins to accelerate in a way you couldn't quite manage before. The picture changes in your 30s, and here's why. After spending much of your 20s fighting tight budgets and heavy debt, this decade brings a different financial landscape. Income tends to climb as careers advance. Student loans and credit cards shrink, and budgets finally start to loosen. It's not that money suddenly feels unlimited, but for the first time, many people have real opportunities to grow lasting wealth instead of just staying afloat. One of the biggest differences comes from income growth. Early in your career, raises usually feel small, maybe a few thousand here and there. But in your 30s, promotions or career changes often bring much larger jumps in salary. Every extra dollar doesn't just buy nicer things, it can boost contributions to retirement accounts or fund more consistent investing. Take advantage of employer matching programs when you can. Turning a $5,000 contribution into $10,000 immediately doubles part of your savings. Compared to entry-level jobs, this stage usually gives you more tools to move forward. Debt reduction makes the shift even more noticeable. Many people spend their 20s paying down student loans, credit cards, or personal debt. And by their 30s, these balances finally start shrinking. The difference isn't just psychological, it's practical. Every dollar that used to go toward minimum payments becomes a dollar you can redirect into savings, retirement accounts, or investments. For most people, this is when their net worth begins to steadily move up instead of hovering near zero. Marriage or long-term partnerships can accelerate the process. Two incomes and combined assets often lift household net worth quickly, but only if both partners don't bring offsetting consumer debt habits. Imagine one person with $60,000 saved joining with another who has $20,000. Separately, those two numbers may feel modest, but as an $80,000 household, the picture looks much stronger. Shared expenses like rent, utilities, and groceries often drop too, creating immediate extra breathing room. Home ownership also plays a major role in this stage of life. Many finally move from renting to buying, and home equity quickly becomes the largest component of net worth. Beyond building equity through mortgage payments, property values themselves usually appreciate. For example, if you buy a home for $475,000 and the market grows at 4% per year, after 5 years, it would be worth about $580,000. That swing of over $100,000 in added value on top of the equity from regular payments can easily push a household past six figures. Still, it's worth remembering that housing markets fluctuate and appreciation is never guaranteed. Federal Reserve data makes this shift clear. Households under 35 have a median net worth of around $39,000. By age 35 to 44, the median jumps to around $135,000. That's nearly a $100,000 difference in a single decade. So, even though you may feel like you're lagging compared to what you see online, the data shows this is exactly the period when wealth usually accelerates. When you put all these pieces together, rising salaries, declining debt, combining household resources, and building equity, it becomes clear why the 30s mark such a turning point. For most people, this is the decade when reaching $100,000 is not only realistic but common. And crossing that line doesn't mark the end of the journey. It's actually the stage where money finally starts compounding in a way that makes progress much faster than it felt before. So, in your 30s, you get more income, less debt, possible combined household resources, and often, your first home. And together those things move most households into six-figure territory. But here's the catch. Reaching that milestone feels slower and harder than what comes after. The first $100,000 is the hardest, because compounding hasn't had time to work yet. In the early stages, saving feels like an uphill battle. You're setting money aside month after month, but the growth looks painfully small. The reason is simple. Compounding only becomes powerful when both the time horizon and the base amount are large enough to create momentum. Let's make it concrete. Say you manage to invest $10,000 in the stock market, and the market returns about 10% that year. On paper, that's a solid gain, but it's only $1,000 in actual dollars. After years of disciplined saving, that number can feel almost invisible. Even if you contribute a few hundred each month, you're still looking at returns in the hundreds, not thousands. At this stage, it can feel like progress is stalled even when you're doing the right things. But here's what's happening underneath. You're laying the foundation. Once your portfolio grows large enough, the exact same percentage gains start to look very different. 10% growth on $100,000 is $10,000. That's the same math you saw earlier, but it feels completely different once the base is bigger. This is why the early grind is so discouraging. It's long and slow, but it's also essential because without that foundation, compounding never has a chance to create real acceleration. This is often described as the snowball effect. At first, it's a small ball rolling slowly down the hill, barely picking up speed. But as it grows, the weight of compounding pushes it forward faster on its own. Past the $100,000 mark, your wealth no longer depends only on how aggressively you save. Your money itself starts pulling its own weight. That's the turning point, and it's why the years after six figures feel dramatically different from the years before. Another key shift happens in your mindset. In the beginning, a lot of your focus is just on getting out of debt and stabilizing your finances. Those dollars are defensive, meant for survival. But once you hit six figures, every new contribution has a different purpose. You're no longer just climbing out of a hole, you're putting money into a system that can accelerate on its own. Contributions feel more meaningful because you know they're feeding a compounding process rather than simply patching up financial leaks. It's also important to recognize the difference between on-paper wealth and compounding wealth. On-paper wealth, like home equity or a car you own outright, boosts your net worth, but it doesn't multiply. It just sits there waiting for you to sell the asset someday. Compounding wealth is different. It comes from assets that grow on their own, like retirement accounts, index funds, or bonds. A paid-off car may look good on your balance sheet, but it won't double in value over time. An investment portfolio can. That distinction shapes whether your wealth slowly inches forward or accelerates. Consider two people. One buys a home and pours every extra dollar into paying it down, thinking their equity will take care of them. Over time, their net worth inches up as the home slowly appreciates. The second person also buys a home but makes sure a portion of income always goes into the market. 10 years later, the second person's portfolio has been compounding, growing faster than what home appreciation alone could do. Same starting point, very different outcomes. This is why the moment you cross $100,000 is such a critical decision point. You can let home equity be the ceiling for your financial growth, or you can shift extra dollars into assets built for compounding. The second option is what turns a milestone into momentum. By choosing investments that grow independently of your income, you ensure that the next milestone comes faster and with less effort. The journey through that first $100,000 may feel like the toughest stretch, but it's the stage that unlocks everything else. If you set habits that prioritize compounding wealth over static assets, you position yourself for the acceleration that makes long-term progress feel real. And when you view the milestone in that light, it reframes the entire race. It's not about how quickly you get there, it's about building the consistency that keeps you moving forward long after. Reaching a $100,000 net worth often happens much later than people expect, but that's not a setback. It's simply the pace at which wealth usually builds. Most households don't cross that line until their late 30s or early 40s, once careers are more stable, debts are reduced, and homeownership begins to add equity. Instead of stressing about hitting milestones too early, focus on steady habits you can fully control, consistent contributions, making the most of employer retirement matches, and avoiding lifestyle inflation so compounding has time to work. If this gave you perspective, share your age, or whether you're under or over 100K in the comments, and subscribe for more research-based financial breakdowns. Patience and smart habits always win out over shortcuts, and that's encouraging news for anyone still on the path.